Throughout my life, there have been several strange instances that I've never been able to explain. Many of you have asked me to relate my very first paranormal experience and why I decided to explore this subject. So tonight, I will tell you what happened to me that made me curious enough to travel around and search for the unknown. For this, we have to go way back to the early 80s and 90s where I grew up. I was raised in South Central LA. For those of you not familiar with the area, this is where Snoop Dogg, NWA, Ice Cube, and Tupac all roam the streets. It is also the exact same area where the famous Rodney King riots happened. And not too far from here, we also had the whole O.J. Simpson drama. LA, as most of you know, is home for countless movie stars, theme parks, and serial killers like Richard Ramirez, who my uncle actually knew. Same as with Charles Manson, who again, my uncle was incarcerated with for a while. I guess you can say my uncle didn't run with a very good crowd. During the time we lived there, my family kept moving around from place to place searching for affordable places to rent, and when I was around 12 years old, we ended up moving to a set of apartments near 61st Street in San Pedro. I won't give you the exact address for obvious reasons. The apartment layout was pretty basic. It had a one bedroom where my parents slept, a long hallway with a restroom that sat between their room and a small dining room area. Right next to that we had a living room and a kitchen. And next to the kitchen was a small laundry room that led to a second set of stairs that in turn led to the property's backyard. My sister and I slept in separate beds that form an L shape that my mom had set up in the living room. Both the beds were separated by a curtain, and she and I always respected what little amount of privacy we had from each other. We didn't have a lot of money, so at the time this is the way we were living. On the same property, there were 3 other apartments with the exact same layout as ours, and at the very back of the property laid an old abandoned deteriorated mobile home where an old woman used to live before she passed away several years before we moved in. During the time we lived in this new neighborhood, we could say that it wasn't the best and definitely not safe to be wandering around alone at all. I remember my mom getting robbed one night while walking home from work. One night after coming back home from cleaning, 2 men snuck up behind her. One of them put an ice pick to her neck near her artery and the other to her stomach. They demanded she handed over the money and ran off once they took what they had. That very same year, my dad got pistol whipped in the back of the head and was also robbed. He came home bleeding and my mom stood up most of the night taking care of his wounds. In our neighborhood, we had almost weekly drive-by shootings that occurred all around us, and our block was no exception. It got to a point that the local police department wouldn't even bother showing up unless someone was hit by a stray bullet, and even then, they would literally ask us to call back after the shooting had stopped. Due to how violent South Central was, my sister and I always walked straight home from school and locked ourselves in the apartment until one of our parents came home. As the weeks went by, I eventually made friends with one of the younger downstairs neighbors' kid, and we were both the same age, so we had similar likes and interests. Since I wasn't allowed to play out in the street with him, we always played outside in the backyard near the abandoned trailer, but from the beginning, I was warned by his father to never go inside it and leave the old lady's things completely alone. One night, him and I were playing Truth or Dare, but we quickly ran out of things to dare each other with, and since it was his turn, he decided to dare me to walk inside the trailer and stay inside of it for at least 5 minutes completely alone. It was already dark out and I was both nervous and scared because I didn't want to get in trouble, but I also didn't want to disappoint my new friend and be labeled as a scary cat. So I guess you can say peer pressure got the best of me, and I did. I very slowly and carefully walked inside the old trailer. At first, I didn't notice anything special or particular about it. To me, it was just an old, messy, abandoned mobile home. Everything the old lady owned was still inside, as if she still lived there and was expected to come back from shopping at any minute. Except it was all very dusty and dirty, and it had a nasty, rotten food smell to it. I was carefully moving around her things, being the curious kid, when I heard a loud knocking on the trailer coming from outside that scared the crap out of me. I came out running, ready to scream at my friend for scaring me, but he wasn't there. He had left me behind and had gone home without warning. I couldn't find him, so I just figured he knocked on the walls to let me know he was leaving. It was already late and I just thought it was his curfew time, so I decided to go home too. Alright, so to make my long story short, weeks went by and I continued sneaking into the trailer and going through the dead lady stuff. One day, while rummaging through the place, I found a few very odd-looking books and a diary tucked away in the closet. I didn't think it would harm anyone if I took them. The old lady had been dead for a long time and she had no family that cared about her. As a matter of fact, the trailer was sitting there until the landlord found someone who would be willing to dispose of it, and so I decided to take the books with me. At the time, reading books was my own getaway from all the street violence and gangs that roamed the streets back then. To this day, I still continue doing that. I remember that the first 2 books were written in Spanish and talk about what I thought was medical stuff. The third book seemed to have been made out of leather, and on the front of it was written Magia Negra, translated to English to Black Magic. At the time, I had no clue what black magic was about, and being a curious kid, I began to read it. This book was more like a diary than anything else. It had what looked like medical potions or mixtures, and what I later found out might have been chants or incantations. It also had photos of people set in different pages. Women, men, children, both old and young. And it also had small pieces of clothing in it. At the time, I had no clue what these books were about, but what I do remember is that in a weird way this book kept calling to me, and I always felt the need to run home and read it, even though I couldn't understand half of what was in it. Not very long after that, I started to become extremely agitated, and everything and everyone around me would piss me off. I didn't want to go out and play anymore. I didn't even want to be around my friends or family. I just wanted to sit on my bed and read this book or be left completely alone. One day while I was in school, my mom was cleaning out my bed and found the books under it. When I came home, I got a scolding and had to tell her exactly where I found them. She quickly took the books away and I never saw them again. She either threw it away, burned them, or placed them back inside the old trailer. I never found out. But either way, that was a big mistake. A few weeks later, I began to experience sleep paralysis and would wake up with scratch marks throughout my entire body in different areas. That had never happened to me before. I remember kitchen chairs moving around and dishes being thrown around the kitchen at night while everyone was asleep. My parents blamed me for the noise, thinking it was me doing it since I had been acting really strange and it was only getting worse. My sister became so afraid of sleeping in her bed that my parents ended up moving hers into their room and leaving the living room area completely to myself at night. Eventually, the sleep paralysis became worse. It got to a point where I began to see a dark, shapeless figure climb over my body, holding me down in place, not allowing me to move, and would just sit there staring right at me. On a few occasions, I do remember feeling a long tongue-like thing going down my throat all the way down to the pit of my stomach. Weeks went by and this thing continued to show up. As a matter of fact, it became even more violent. I would wake up with bruise marks on my chest and my stomach, but I never told my parents about it because I was afraid to. As embarrassing as this is to admit, at 12 years old I was peeing my bed constantly because I was too afraid to walk the dark hallway to the bathroom, fearing I'd see the demonic figure standing there like I often did. But the strangest thing about all of this, besides me peeing the bed at 12 years old, was that some mornings right after sleep paralysis, I would wake up throwing up sand. Yes, sand. It felt and looked just like beach sand, and there was a lot of it. I have no idea what the hell that was all about. I've never heard about anyone's having that same issue before. After it became too much for me to handle, I ended up confessing to my parents about what I had done and what had been happening to me. They both looked concerned and confused at the same time, so they went to talk to the neighbors about it to find out more about the trailer and the person who lived inside of it. The neighbors explained to my parents that the lady who lived in there was a bruja, meaning a witch, and she would do strange rituals in that trailer, and that's why no one had ever dared to move it or any of her belongings because they were too afraid that something like that would happen. Another very strange thing the neighbors told my parents was that the kid that I claimed I kept playing with, he had actually passed away years ago during a gang initiation shooting that happened in our very block. And their only son that they had refused to come out to play with me because I always asked about what I thought was his little brother. So after learning about this, it didn't take very long for us to move away. But as many experienced paranormal investigators know, moving away doesn't solve the problem. Of course, we didn't know this at the time. As the years gone by, I became curious as to why these entities continue to stay with you like this one has with me. Another thing that I want to also mention is that to this day, if you ask me to describe this kid that I used to play with, I would not be able to tell you his facial features. But I will tell you one thing, and one thing that has stuck to my mind this entire time. That same kid that I used to play with, I remember seeing his photo inside that book the lady had. I've apologized to the woman for taking her books, and although I will still wake up with unexplained scratches on me on occasion, it's nowhere near as bad as it once was. As a matter of fact, the only reason I remember about this whole story was because lately, I have been waking up with a feeling of sand texture in my mouth. So that triggered this memory. The throwing up of sand has mostly gone away, but what freaks me out the most, and still to this day continues to show itself every now and then while I go on paranormal investigations, is the apparitions and sounds of small children. For those of you who've been following me for a while and are listening closely to some of my videos, you will occasionally hear what sounds like a small child talk or sing in my videos, most prominently the one in my Queen Mary video. I still have no clue what that spirit child was saying, but hundreds of people have told me they also hear it and sounds like it's singing some sort of nursery rhyme. Alright, I don't know what's back here. What the heck? Maybe you can help me decipher what it's saying. So this is part of the reason why I continue to search for the paranormal. And you are more than welcome to think that what I'm telling you is made up or fake. I am not here to convince you or anyone else that what I've experienced is real. When I film my videos, I rather bring the truth out to you, Even though sometimes those videos make for a boring video, it would be very easy for me to run around and scream and yell at everything that might sound weird or strange. But as we all know, you can't always capture paranormal evidence on every single trip you make. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them the best I can remember. Please leave a comment letting me know if you experienced something similar to me. I would love to read about it. You can also email me your experience at seekinglegends2020@gmail.com.